I'm Aaron Fleming with Enlink Midstream, and we've had the privilege of being at the conference several years now. I had the opportunity to do it 3 or 4 years ago, maybe. I think I followed Jason at that one as well, so I've always got these big shoes to fill here. But I want to give you a little bit of overview of who we are, and then obviously focus in on the Marcellus Utica and our Ohio River Valley assets and the services and things that we do in this part of the world. Next, please. So Enlink Midstream, we're headquartered out of Dallas, Texas. We've also got a huge office presence in Houston. But you look, we're in most of the premier production basins throughout the South and the East. Barnett, Permian, Eagle Ford. We've got about 1,100 employees, operating 21 processing facilities. We process about a little over 5 BCF a day of natural gas, 7 fractionators, about 290 million a day in fractionation capacity throughout the company, and about 12,000 miles of pipeline. So very diverse, very wide-reaching platform of assets that we operate. We'll go to the next slide, please, and we'll zoom in a little bit on our Ohio River Valley assets. And Joe touched on the Enlink name is relatively new to Appalachia, but the story of the assets in which we own and operate is really a neat story. And if you were here a few years back when I spoke, I know we used this same slide, and I think it's just really neat when you think about just the transition of the energy sector in the state of Ohio in particularly. 1870, John Rockefeller starts the Standard Oil Company, and then decides, hey, I need a vehicle to navigate this oil that I'm finding. So he formed the Buckeye Pipeline Company as a subsidiary to move oil from the very first oil plays to the end users and markets. Flash forward a little bit, Pennsylvania Railroad acquired those assets, but in 1975, they spun those assets off to Ohio Oil Gathering, in which Clearfield bought in 1983, and was fortunate enough that I worked for Clearfield Energy. Ohio Oil Gathering is the name that resonates mostly in this area because it's been around essentially over 100 years. Crosstex Energy bought those assets in 2012, and then in 2014, Crosstex Energy, largest customer was Devon Energy in Oklahoma and North Texas. Devon Energy also had some midstream assets. So we took the Crosstex Energy assets, Devon Energy assets, put them together, and that formed Enlink in 2014. So the Enlink name to this part of the world is 7 years old. But when you think of the asset base that we'll talk about and some of the things and services we provide in the region, we've been here for 150 years. We're really proud of that. Next, please. So we're a midstream company. So we're not drilling, we're not fracking, we're not refining, we're not using. We're simply a logistics piece that moves products and services from the wellhead, from the production point, to the end users and the refiners in the downstream market. So we're really the connecting piece between the energy source itself and life as we know it with the consumption of all the hydrocarbon products. We have a diverse portfolio of assets up here. We've got rail, we've got barge, we operate and own compression and stabilization, we've got storage, brine disposal, and a very experienced heavy-duty truck fleet, and operate about 200 miles of pipe in the Ohio, West Virginia regions. And I'll talk a little bit more in depth on each of these on the next slide, please. So we're strategically located with our Bells Run barge complex, and it's down near Marietta, Ohio. It is a hub that collects both Marcellus and Utica condensate, crude oil, and also brine water. It's on the Ohio River, as I mentioned, and it allows the local producers to produce products and get them beyond the local market consumptions. Jason touched on, obviously, they have a refinery in Canton. There's another refinery he mentioned in Newell, West Virginia. But then, as far as regionally, that are the two kind of main refiners in the region. So the slides we saw this morning, the amount of production of the resource we have here requires those products to get outside of the region. Our barge terminal complex is one of those tools that help get producers out of the region. We last year loaded 332 barges safely on the Ohio River. So that's just shy of 9 million barrels was loaded on a barge and taken down the Ohio River last year from our Bells Run facility. We've expanded that, and I'll touch more on that in a little bit later. Added some additional truck offload and added some stabilization capabilities there as well. We've also got rail terminal at our Black Run terminal. That's kind of north and east of Zanesville, Ohio, on the Ohio Central. So we have the ability to bring in train, load cars with crude or condensate, and get them to market as well. Next, please. Storage. Just as the folks are talking about the underground storage, we have the above ground storage, and in times that we have been going through, you cannot have enough storage. I'm sure you guys can relate to that as well. We've got about 665,000 barrels of above ground storage in our network. That's composed primarily of hydrocarbons, condensate crude, but there is some brine storage in that as well that we use as storage to feed our underground injection wells that we operate. We expanded that pretty significantly in the 2014-2015 timeframe, as the graphs we saw this morning kind of showed in parallel that rampant production in this region. We've got additional storage projects that we're currently evaluating. As we've heard from many of the other speakers, capital's kind of on pause right now, but there's a lot of optimism around the upcoming years as to what the industry has. We've got 9 injection points on that 200 miles of pipe for truck unloading. So we're sending out trucks to producers' well pads, producers' storage facilities, picking up crude, condensate, or brine, bringing that back into our network, where it is then pumped via pipeline to our Bells Run terminal. So when you look at kind of Marietta in the middle of Ohio and West Virginia, our West Virginia system is pumping north to the Ohio River. The Ohio system is pumping south. Kind of all roads lead to our Bells Run storage and barging terminal. Next, please. I also mentioned compression and stabilization. Obviously, we saw the numbers of the amount of gas that's being produced in this part of the world, and it's pretty staggering. We have a piece of that, a small piece of that, operating 8 compressor stations with stabilization, about 530 million a day of gas compression, and roughly 50,000 barrels a day of stabilization. We're certainly not the size and scale of Jason and the MPLX Mark West guys on the compression side, but we also provide those services to get producers, into pipelines to get their product to the market. I touched on an expansion. So this is a new expansion we did at our Bells Run terminal on the river. And we had recently completed and commissioned, actually February of this year, 5,000 barrel per day stabilizer. So that asset sits right in the middle of the Marcellus and the Utica. And it's positioned well to get some of the higher vapor pressure condensate stabilized and get it market ready and get it on the water to the downstream markets and the end users. So logistically, from a barging perspective, it's a little bit closer than some of the runs further up the Ohio, up into the Panhandle, for example. We're really proud of that. We've got a 5,000 barrel per day unit sitting there with a provision to expand that upon need, and also added 2 additional truck offload points there so that the unstabilized condensate can be brought in, stabilized, put in the tanks, and ultimately onto the barge to the downstream markets. Next, please. Okay. So obviously, you've heard of this COVID-19 thing, and I can say it's just great to stand in front of some people and actually have a conversation. Although at a distance, it's better than talking to a screen, which we've all been doing for quite some time. So I think it's important just to talk about some of the pretty aggressive steps we took early on. I look back at the last handful of months, and essentially I've worked more from home than I have in the office for this year. We're middle of September already, but our teams really did a great job of adapting to the new environment. And I'll touch on a little bit more of that here just when we talk about kind of our execution plan and where we see things. But we quickly went to what we call a war room mentality. And what's the safest thing we can do for our employees? And ultimately we sent everyone home to work from home, minus our plant essential workers that need to provide flow assurance to our customers in early March. One thing that for me personally I took away from that was just the resilience of the workforce we have, and I'm sure many of you have similar stories with your own companies, in that it didn't feel like we really missed a beat. I feel like that we put extra emphasis on customer relationships because it was harder to communicate and interact with your core customers on a daily basis. For so long we've just taken for granted, well, we'll go grab lunch and everything will be fine. Well, we all had to stop doing that. So we really put an emphasis on connecting with our customers and equally connecting with our employees. Having those weekly Zoom meetings, having those weekly WebEx with customers, so that we could really make sure that we weren't missing anything. A lot of us working from home, small children. I couldn't tell if I was supposed to be, dad at work or dad at home, because it was all intertwined. But we enacted a lot of pretty strict safety protocols. We just recently went back to the office a few weeks ago. I would say from a business perspective, kudos to the team. We adapted brilliantly, didn't miss a beat. In fact, this week we set our safety record, 187 days without an injury. That's a new record that was set this week. Our heavy-duty fleet has driven over 3.3 million miles without an accident. And these are all arguably during some of the toughest conditions that any of us have had to experience because of the way we've had to conduct business. So really proud of those. Again, extra focus on the safety and the customer relations during that time. And I think that everyone in this room that's been through these dips and swings and cycles in the energy industry, I think we always feel like we come out the other side stronger. Now that's a knothole to get pulled through to get to the other side. But I think all of us can look back and find ways that we all became a little bit better, a little bit stronger for going through that. And I think we certainly can testify to that. Next slide, please. With the execution plan and just that focus on execution, as many of our companies have done, we've had to make some tough decisions to drive out costs. And we were able to do that. We drove out over $120 million in costs this year. I've heard the catchphrase free cash flow multiple times this morning. We'll generate in excess of $750 million in cash flow this year by being more efficient, finding new ways to do things. And that, every time we come through these, it feels like, well, this is the new normal. And I think each and every one of you in here probably has a story similar to that. But we've been able to, adapt to the change. And the thing that we feel sets us apart with the diverse set of assets that we have is we can quickly adapt from, maybe hauling one product on a truck to this point. Well, now that truck's hauling a different product to that point because the demand changed or the production changed. And in doing so, we were able to exit. Our Q2 results were flat to last year's Q2. And, going into March and April with commodities, crude can trade negative. We learned that. It was a tough spot for everyone to be in, but we were able to put on different hats, change the way some of our systems and assets operated, and continue to deliver takeaway and results for the customers. Additionally, we think that obviously we're not out of the woods yet as an industry. There's still some things. We've seen some good stats come out from EIA showing some draws in supply. I think the real question becomes, what is the demand? You know, where is the demand with states still not being open? But we're optimistic. We've talked to a lot of our producer customers, a lot of the end users, as I mentioned in that extensive heightening of customer relationships, and you know, there's still work to be done, but we believe, I believe that we're you know, positioned well for the long run. We're going to come out. We've got a strong balance sheet, and we're still delivering, you know, results to the customers.